Hi, my name is Moulton. I'm the exhibition programmer here at Gagosian Gallery, Beverly Hills. I'm going to introduce you to our summer group show entitled Clear. The basic nature of the show was to try to rethink the California light and space movement, which occurred here in the early 70s. Calling something clear has a very obvious reference to the notion of translucence and the general kind of clarity required for light, such as light on a clear day or clarity of mind or body. It's a word that does offer quite a number of hooks in terms of signifiers and meanings that we'll expect the viewers to bring. The gallery here in Beverly Hills is divided into two rooms, and we try to divide the show in a way that moves a viewer through an experience that hopefully alludes or connects the dots around this idea of astral projection as it relates to things like the light and space movement. The first room, which the viewer enters, is a room that I would say is addressing the idea of the physical body as it confronts the notion of astral projection. What we're kind of looking at is a room that resembles a spaceship. We have these kind of windows looking down on the earth and out at the cosmos. And maybe this spaceship kind of heading into a fold in the universe, which is this Douglas Gordon work that we have in the corner there. The first work that viewers encounter is a piece by artist Jason Metcalf. And what he's done for the exhibition is really given us this initial point of entry, literalizing a very important aspect of the experience of astral projection. And that's this here. It's called a silver cord. Astral projection is this phenomenon that's existed through time, history, and across cultures. And just to kind of unpack that, it's the idea of us having this ability to leave our physical body and inhabit an astral one there in the astral plane. Now, this is just almost automatic to then connect it to ideas of spirituality and religion and what happens to our spirit upon death, or whether there are moments of out-of-body experience actually occurring and what form those things take. Through the accounts that we've found existing on astral projection, there's a third of them where people report having a silver cord emerging from their body. This is a thing that they notice when they're in the astral plane after having left their physical body. They see this silver cord emerging from either the umbilical, the core, or the heart. And it's this cord that tethers them to their physical body and allows them to kind of pull themselves back to the hospital bed or whatever kind of traumatic or near-death or spiritual or transcendental experience they might have emerged from. This is an 8-foot-long aerospace-grade stainless steel rod that's essentially passing through the gallery wall. This is a 4-foot thick wall and emerges on the other side. So it's 2 feet on each side. It's sort of sticking out here. And essentially it's this great kind of reference point for the experience of astral projection because it's going to be the first and the last thing that viewers encounter, much like in the astral projection experience. One particular dimension that I would like to touch on is this idea of cosmic photography, something that's maybe a tenuous connection to the movement itself, but ultimately is a nice supplemental tangent that one can easily touch on. And that's met here with the work of Andreas Gursky, his Ocean No. 4. Lisa Oppenheim's Heliograms and Thomas Roof's Sterna series. These are works that help reinforce this idea of the spaceship format that we're hoping this room takes on, where we're able to see looking down there on the Earth and then out into the kind of infinite cosmos, and nearest to the Earth would be the sun. Another aspect of the first gallery that we'd like to touch on is this notion of the reflection. It's the easiest way to talk about it, and the aspects of mirrors as a kind of a gateway. And really what this corner is about is a kind of chemistry concept called chirality, which is a molecular way to talk about reflection or perfect opposites. The easiest way to talk about chirality is through thinking about the hands, and the hands being this perfect mirror of each other, or the identical twins. They, of course, look exactly the same, but their chemical makeup is such that they wouldn't be able to be superimposed on one another and be this perfect opposite. So that's how you define when something is chiral, which is, in a sense, what we look at with the reflection. It seems like our perfect opposite, but in fact it's made up of an optical illusion. And this is a large work by Douglas Gordon. It's from his new body of work called Everything is Nothing Without Its Reflection. And so he's used pairings of mirrors and photographs. The mirrors are there to help kind of remind us of the photograph. And the photographs themselves, what we're looking at is essentially a kind of retrospective very nostalgic look back at Douglas's life through the works that he's produced, such as Play Dead or the Xenodon film, vacation photos that we might not normally be privy to that allow us this very personal and diaristic access to the artist's life. We have this work by Michael Craig Martin up on the wall here, which is called An Oak Tree, a cornerstone within the history of conceptual art and a very important work to have in the exhibition, which is a glass of water. We're essentially looking at a glass of water that, through the dialogue that comes with the piece there on the wall in the text panel, we read that Michael Craig Martin, the artist, has, through conceptual powers, changed everything but the physical properties of this glass of water to become an oak tree. So in that sense, it's this representation of the parallel world that the mirror offers and where the terms are maybe different, and a glass of water could in fact become an oak tree. Here we're looking at a brand new work by Dan Cullen that he's actually debuted for this show. This was a work that was made for the exhibition, and it's called The Slim Reaper. What we're looking at are 6 broken backboards that are formed into a spiral. And I think that they really help reinforce this idea of the spaceship in the room, or maybe like a compass, or even a portal that we're really hoping to suggest, this liminal sort of border that's going to happen between the state of the physical body and the astral one. And I think it does really kind of literally tie the room together in trying to kind of create this sense of a portal or a stargate. And then the last aspect of the first gallery that we wanted to touch on was the notion of phenomenology, which is a very important philosophical concept that connects to the light and space movement and also to some of the newer artists in the show that we've added to the dialogue. And that kind of gets very neatly compressed in this work by Idris Khan that's behind me, which is called The World of Perception. And The World of Perception is a book written by Maurice Merleau-Ponty that followed his very famous text, The Phenomenology of Perception, that was released in 1945. After much acclaim, Merleau-Ponty was asked to produce a kind of maybe a digestible text for the general populace that would go through these ideas, and it was done in the form of a radio address. This had 6 nights on the radio in which he would address different topics like man in relationship to space, in relationship to himself, in relationship to the other, in relationship to the animal kingdom, and so forth. It's a very nicely compressed detailing of the ideas he was working with. And that we see here in work of Idris Khan, which is a work of the same title, where Idris, in his kind of conceptual photography practice, has gone and taken every single page of the book, The World of Perception, and made them all transparent and superimposed on top of each other. So we're able to get all of this philosophy in a single vista in one go. So now we're standing in our second gallery, our South Gallery. If the first gallery was about the physical body, this gallery is meant to address the ideas of the astral body and the astral plane. So we've kind of left our physical body and we're in some kind of astral experience. The room's a little less resolved. It's a little more moody in terms of lighting, and things are configured in a way that kind of addresses the notion of ethereality, compared to the last room, which was really about the physical body and the reality of confronting these ideas like the potentials of the reflection. Now we're in the reflection. We've passed through the looking glass. So already you see that there's this kind of nice formal component here of a sort of a shooting star, a form that's kind of moving in space. That's starts with a triangle of Olafur Eliasson there on the left, which it's called Your Focus Fade, and the center of it is obscured, so the reflection is not properly reciprocated, so we're not able to kind of maybe see ourselves in the astral plane. And then it kind of morphs very neatly into the work of Germaine Kruip, who's a Dutch artist and also works with light, reflection, shadow, and very atmospheric situations, very similar to Olafur Eliasson, both of whom are very natural additions to the light and space dialogue. And that kind of moves very neatly up into a brand new work by Larry Bell called A Light Knot. And so we have this nice kind of formal shift that's happening right in front of us that sort of looks a bit like a shooting star. And then the other family of work in this kind of configuration is looking at, of course, our light and space alumni, which is Larry Bell, James Turrell, and Duane Valentine, 3 artists who were really the main faces of this movement. The Turrell work, however, is really the focus in terms of the ideas of the show, because this is the largest artwork in the history of art, and there it is kind of compressed very nicely in a rather smallish photo. But I think it allows us to visualize it in a way that is not usually available, and even kind of brings out some formal qualities that are interacting in an interesting way with other aspects of the show. Ultimately, what we see is a relationship with a work we'll see later, a work of Ingo Swann called Cosmic Egg, and the formal relationship between these two works kind of puts them in a nice conversation. What we're looking at now is a work by artist Kirsten Pieroth, who also made work for the exhibition, and that's this piece here called Essences. It's very intentional that this work sits opposite the work of Idris Khan that we saw in the last gallery, which was about this digestibility of knowledge in a total form. Here, Kirsten has done something somewhat similar, but with different effect. She's an artist who's very engaged in alchemical processes, in that she creates very personal alchemical sort of chemistry situations. In particular, we can see that in this work, which is called Essences. And what she's essentially done is boiled down books that have been important for her development as an artist and as a person. All of these books have sat in the pot overnight to the point that they break down from pulp to just pure liquid muck. She then filters them and pours them into the jar when they're boiling hot and then seals them. And in effect, we get this sense of the distillation of the knowledge, of a very important idea within alchemy. And so somehow we're given this access to the information in a very different and potentially digestible form. But she's gone much further than that. She's not only given us the books that make up who she is as a person, she's also given up all of the logistical and bureaucratic details that make up who she is as well, such as her passport, her driver's license, her high school diploma, her power supply contract, her rental agreement, her washing machine manual. All of these things boiled down into a nothing, into an essence. One artist that we have who I think offers us a nice illustration of this revealed visibility is Jorinda Vogt, who is an artist who's really created her own language of form that makes us analyze movement in a way we might not have prior. She's really an artist who creates personal algorithms, has a very sensitive eye, a very sensitive ear for things like movement and the science of movement. She'll analyze things like social or behavioral situations, or things like the bird flying through the sky and the path the eagle might take, or air traffic control patterns. And she then renders them. She breaks them down into rules and parameters and conditions that are not exactly empirical in their result, but they seem so, in that they allow us to take on the understanding that this is a visualization of something like behavior, which is ultimately a difficult thing to give a physical form to. And here's a body of work that's looking at the evolution of ego motion, or how the body is pushed through space vis-a-vis desire. She's given us a system of these kind of conditions that have what seems to have created the forms we're looking at, and they're rendered in white gold leafing and copper leafing, which have this also great formal effect in the exhibition. Here we're looking at two sink-like forms by the artist Daniel Turner. He's an artist who is working in particular with this kind of sculptural language, is what you would often see from him. He's really creating or playing with these kind of moments of uncanny that you might experience in a dream. They're kind of ambivalent objects that have a loaded potential narrative to them that's very unresolved, and in a way something similar to what we associate with the work of Robert Gober or Gregor Schneider, but intersected with Donald Judd, Left Out in the Rain. And that's literally somehow what we have here. These are what we can call sinks. They're identical pair. The vessels are dysfunctional. They don't have a drain outlet, so whatever they're used for remains to be seen. And what he's doing is he's putting in water. We're not really sure of the origin of it. It's believed to come from maybe near his studio in Brooklyn, maybe the East River, maybe a creek he found somewhere in New York that might be nicely toxic, and just puts this water there in the vessel and allows it to evaporate, and it results in these kind of very layered sedimentary situations that lead one to question the nature of the materials that were put in there and why. The yellow is also meant to kind of instill a kind of awkwardness that we might associate with the kind of institutional yellows or greens that you'd have in old hospitals. In particular, it's a color reference to a studio residency that he did a number of years ago, in which there was a small kitchenette that had this same color. Ultimately, this kitchenette and this color had kind of a very intensely strong psychic energy for Daniel, and ultimately prevented him from doing anything more than just focus on them. And so when it came time to show his results of his residency, he just kind of cleaned up the studio and really highlighted the kitchenette, because that was for him an incredible source of energy. To my left, we have a large work by artist Mark Lombardi, an artist who has become almost a person of folkloric proportions in the contemporary art world. He's an artist famously known for his work with conspiracy theories and his cosmic mappings of these kind of connections between people like the CIA and CEOs of companies and the bagmen and the presidents of the time. This is a work that is looking at the largest banking scandal in history, and it does in fact include people like Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Armand Hammer, and any number of other people that might rather not prefer to be listed in this way, in this context. It's one of the last large-scale works that he produced during his lifetime, and it's a work that, as you see, has suffered a very significant event of some kind. The markings that we see here on this work, large work on paper, were accidental and happened during his lifetime, and some argue that this incident that we're looking at is one of the contributing factors that brought about the end of his life. And essentially, this is a work that had an intense value for the development of Lombardi's career at the time, and was a work that was seen in exhibitions like the Greater New York happening in 2000. And ultimately what occurred was a sprinkler main turned on in his studio, just briefly, but long enough to have done its damage. And Mark then went about and very quickly had to remake this work because it was a work that had just been acquired by the Whitney Museum of American Art. And so the work that people see in the Whitney, and that was also presented in Documenta in 2012, was the kind of the next version of this piece, and a version that I think brought quite a lot of stress onto the artist. And for us, I think it's like a lost version of a famous Mark Lombardi work, which happens to have these very almost macabre details to them that relate nicely to our Daniel Turner and its spots of rust, maybe kind of splashing out there onto the work, but details that really somehow intersect the very noir narrative of Lombardi's life with the practice that he had as an artist. Here we're looking at a work by artist Piero Golia called Untitled Clone, and this is a work that really helps us address a very specific idea of the doppelganger or the double or the astral body and its relationship to the physical body. Already in this room you've seen a couple moments where there's two of each artwork, but one thing that we've avoided is really over-embellishing this idea of the other. It's a show that is addressing a science fictional interpretation of light and space, and the only place that can end or go is maybe with some aliens, or which is this ultimate other. We've very consciously tried to leave that out of the narrative because that's really, maybe like astral projection, just a big part of our imagination and the figments that result from it. And so this work is our kind of a stand-in for our ultimate other. It is the doppelganger of Piero Golia. When Piero Golia arrives in Los Angeles, no matter where these are in the world, they'll just turn on. In that respect, they do serve as a kind of a stand-in for his presence based on absence or actual presence. Behind me, we're looking at the work by artist Johnny Motti, which is entitled Higgs in Search of the Anti-Motti, or Looking for the Anti-Motti. It's a film that lasts 6 hours, and what we're looking at is essentially the back of the artist as he walks through the 30-kilometer tunnel of the CERN Large Hadron Collider below Geneva. This is a place where science fiction has created science fact. We are essentially looking at these possibilities of the parallel universe or the double or the different kind of possibilities available in addressing alternate worlds. And ultimately, the real place we're going to find it is not up in the sky, but probably in this location that Motti's walking through. The CERN Large Hadron Collider is the largest science experiment in the world, and it's an experiment that's built to find the Higgs boson particle, or also known as the God particle. They're accelerating these particles at some enormous speeds, velocities, and then crashing them into each other to replicate the Big Bang. And of course, the hyperbolic fears of journalism and popular imagination, and even the scientists themselves, is that this will ultimately result in the creation of dark matter and black holes, which could, the very worst, suck in our planet. So what Moulton has done here in 2005 is gone on a mission through the entirety of this 30-kilometer long tunnel, an endurance test in search of the anti-Moulton, in search of his own doppelganger, because surely this would be the place where that character would emerge. And lastly, I'm going to talk to you about the work of Ingo Swann, an artist and a person, a cultural figure who's the other side of the coin of this story. If the light and space movement and James Turrell were our kind of front door entry into thinking about what's happening here, he, in 1971, begins collaborating with the Stanford Research Institute, looking at the potentials of the powers of the mind to be harnessed. In particular, looking at this idea called remote viewing, a term actually coined by Swann in 1971. And remote viewing is not exactly the same as astral projection. It's something a little more controlled, where the remote viewer essentially has this conscious mind power ability to close their eyes and through some kind of intense meditation leave their body and visualize places too remote to be seen or known about even, such as what was happening behind the Iron Curtain or on the moon or on Europa off of Jupiter. Ingo Swann became this face of the success of this idea of remote viewing. He was already a known psychic and clairvoyant, and through collaborating with the Stanford Research Institute was able to open and access this ability. His ability was so successful that it got the attention of the Central Intelligence Agency, and they eventually went so far as to spend over $10 million in investing in what's called the Stargate project. We're really looking at the US government's efforts to weaponize telepathy and powers of the mind, and in particular this idea of remote viewing for intelligence gathering purposes. And Ingo Swann remains the face of that. He was that most successful remote viewer who was able to go to these places far-flung and unknown.